Hi everyone, Kim here at Olive City Oasis. It is Monday, July 24th, about 6 p.m. and only 98 degrees Fahrenheit. We are having a break in our weather, which has been for about a month between 105 and 115 Fahrenheit, sometimes even creeping above that. So I took advantage of this cooler weather and got up super early this morning, got all the watering done, and filmed a July garden tour for all of you. Now, as you'll see, some of the plants just didn't make it. Some are still struggling, but a lot of them are doing great. And I'm very happy to say that my battle with the squirrels is going very well right now. So if you watch a few of my recent videos, you'll know the struggle I've been having with them. Let's just say that the squash and the melons are doing much better now. Stay tuned to find out why. Also, very pleased with how the red Roselle Hibiscus bed is doing. So come along with me now. Let's go see what the July garden looks like. Quite a big change from the June garden tour, that's for sure. So one of the biggest successes of the garden this summer, and something that makes me very happy, is this watermelon bed. It has just taken off. And if you move in closer and you look very hard, you can see there are actually a large number of moon and stars watermelon growing in the bed. They're just difficult to see. For instance, there's one right in there that's about 10 inches long. Yeah, the bed is just full of them. And this bed did start off a combination of squash and watermelon, but the squirrels, if you've watched my past videos, you know, kept eating the squash leaves, and I replanted so many times. And I finally just gave up and let the watermelon take over because the birds don't seem to like the watermelon at all, and we do. I do think we're going to have a super big crop of watermelon this year because these plants are just full of blooms. Now, if you've never seen moon and stars watermelon before, and you notice all the little yellow dots on the leaves, that is totally normal. Those are the stars of the plant. And when the melons come on, they have these little star yellow dots on them too. And then they have one large yellow-orange spot that is the moon. Moon and Stars watermelon is also known as Cherokee watermelon. And I'm looking forward to a bumper crop of them this year. Now, I did try all sorts of things to combat the squirrels, and nothing seemed to be working. I finally came upon two things that seem to be working really well. One, I have brought out my cat, BB, into the garden with me again in the mornings. So she's out here for 3 or 4 hours with me. And I don't know if that's had any effect, her smell and her prowling around on the squirrels or not, but I like to think maybe it has. Right, BB? Right? Oh, you're such a good kitty. But Oliver is the main reason I believe the squirrels have started leaving us alone. I put Oliver and some of his friends around the places in the garden where the squirrels were the most active, and immediately they stopped. Immediately the plant started growing again, and I haven't had an issue with squirrels since that time 3 weeks ago. Here in my Chinese long red noodle bean area, which the beans planted late are finally climbing the trellis and starting to bloom. My squash in the front that the squirrels had eaten down multiple times have grown back and are finally starting to leaf out again. And I think that they might do very well now. At this point before, the squirrels would totally have decimated all these leaves, and yet here they are undamaged, about 8 plants of them. Here are some more growing in the bed that before the squirrels had just devastated repeatedly. I think Oliver the Owl has done his job. That is the only difference there has been, other than the cat coming out with me for a few hours a morning, which, you know. Here's another bed where one of Oliver's friends now lives, and look at the melons growing all around. The melons were the one other plant, besides the squash, that the squirrels kept eating. And look, they're just growing great now. These are all plants that have been eaten down to their base and have come back since and look so healthy now. And again, the only difference are these decoy owls. Now, in my chocolate mint tea video, where I first introduced the decoy owls as a possibility for deterring the squirrels, several people told me they didn't think it would work. You know, I tried it anyway and it did work. So I'm not doubting that maybe they tried it and it didn't work for them. But what I say is try it in your garden because you never know. It has worked for me. And I couldn't be happier about it. Got some echinacea there in the middle doing really well. And of course the Mexican poppies over there that are just so prolific and so easy to grow anywhere. They're doing well. Another bed that had been full of squash, and all of them were eaten so badly I just had to take them out, except for 2 plants which I left, put in and out, and looky now. They're doing great. And behind this squash, I've got my walking green onions freshly growing after having taken out all the old growth. And I have blank spots, which I'll be filling up at the end of August probably with some fall seedlings that I have just recently started now. I do need to let the heat cool off a bit though before I put those in, or they'd just be decimated as young starts. Now here's a bed that looks a bit different than it did in June, and that's because the gladioli in the middle are now blooming a deep, deep purple. Just loving that. These are peppers I've got going here. And while I lost about 6 of them to the intense heat, the others have managed to survive and are now thriving. I've got a Tunisian bakludi here and a sweet banana pepper. Some of them are full of peppers and some are just starting to send out blossoms now. But they're all looking really good. This here is a mystery pepper. Not sure what it is. That happens. This one is a Buena Mulata, and it has, I don't know if you can tell in this intense sun, but it has some variegated leaves, and the stems are kind of a maroon color. Oh, I see a purple blossom. Gonna be having Buena Mulata peppers soon. Oh, there's several more blossoms. Cool. Now the Cubanelle, right next to it's already got some peppers on it. I think there's 3 or 4 on it. Yeah. And more coming, so that's great. Cubanelles are always so productive once they get going. Long into the fall, actually. These purple gladioli are just so lovely. And I like having them down the middle of my veggie beds. Something beautiful to look at that don't seem to be bothered at all by the intense heat of 110 plus Fahrenheit. If you're wondering about the ladder back there, I'm using it for a project reinforcing my fence there, and I just don't put it away because it's too much of a chore. What is this big pile of dead looking stuff? Well, believe it or not, all of that came off just 2 calendula plants. They look completely dead, but I could see that underneath they were still sending out new growth. And now I've got this one and this one looking pretty good. Amazing that those 2 green plants were buried beneath this. In other words, these were the stems of the plant that were blooming way back in May and June. And these are the new growth stems of the plants that were coming up underneath the old. So I just had to clear away the old to make room for the new. These are 2 violet sparkle peppers. And I see I've got a pepper starting on that one. Very cool. 2 newer calendula plants there. And here we've got a couple of very fruitful. Get in here and you can see some of the fruit. It's full of them. These are Italian pepperoncinis. Ooh, there's some big ones that are blushing in there. This is the first time I've grown pepperoncinis. We love to eat them and we use them in several recipes. but they're always green. I've never used them red. It's the first time I've grown them, like I said, and in the store they only come green. So I'm gonna try some green, some in this blushing stage that I've got going on here, and then I'm gonna let some turn red and see what I think of all the different flavor profiles. And here, let's see, this is a Georgia Flame full of blossoms. There's a pepper. I think I've got a pepper down here. Oh yes, here I've got one long big one that's starting to blush a little. Okay, there's several on the plant. That is exciting because that plant is actually not that big and it's already producing well. Okay. A couple of more calendulas that are struggling through the heat. And then on the other side of the gladioli pepper bed, I have, let's see, this is another Tunisian Bakludi, and it's late to the game, bushing out nicely, but it started later in the more intense heat, and it's not fruiting yet. This is interesting because this was some very tall, over 7 feet tall, broomcorn sorghum that was a volunteer because I grew that in this bed last year, and I cut it all down to the base. You can see right there. Yeah, all those yellowing stumps, that's where I cut it down to, but then right out of the stumps grew more. I cut them down because they were really shading this little plant right here, which is a Buena Mulata pepper with blossoms. But now they're coexisting nicely, so I'll let them grow for now and see what happens. Here I have, what is this? Oh, these are 2 more pepperoncinis, and they're just loaded. One is small, but it's already having peppers on it. But this one is just huge. It's leaning over. I've tried different ways to stake it up. But I mean, it is loaded all over with these pepperoncinis. So I need to start harvesting. I think I'll harvest most of these off this plant for green because I know that brined, they're gonna make my own wonderful peppers for holiday season. We like eating them fresh as well as using them in recipes. Now my main herb bed grows alongside my chicken run, my original chicken run. I do have herbs growing all over the garden, but this was my first original solely herb bed. And down here on the end is my lemon verbena, which looks like a huge bush. It's almost like a tree. I have cut this back 3 times this season down to like 2 feet tall, and it just keeps pushing out the growth. It's due for another harvest, and I'm going to cut it way back and let it bush out again. I love lemon verbena in the garden because it is absolutely the best smelling plant I've ever smelled. Yeah, oh, just brushing by it smells so good. And of course it makes the most amazing tea. In fact, I'm gonna do an herbal tea video later this week that includes a variety, a blend of herbs, and one of the main herbs in it is lemon verbena. So there's some marjoram and some sage. Doing well because it's in the shade of the lemon verbena. Maybe that's a reason not to cut back the lemon verbena, at least right here where it's shading the sage. And then I've got some oregano that I think I'm going to pull out entirely. It's about 5 years old. And while it's still sending out growth on the sides, the center is very dead looking. So it's not very attractive. I think I'm going to pull it out and plant some new oregano. Same maybe with this thyme. I have a lot of side growth. There's a lot of self-seeded volunteers here, but the center is looking pretty sparse. Thyme does tend to do that. I'll have to see how that goes over the next few months. The thing about pruning right now, anything, whether it's a tree or an herb or whatever, is that you're then encouraging new growth. And do we really want new growth right in the middle of intense summer heat? Probably not. That's probably really not a good thing. It probably would die back the new growth. Obviously, if you're growing in a shaded area or, in a covered patio somewhere you can protect it, then I'd say go ahead and prune. But if it's out in exposed sunshine and you are getting really hot temperatures, I'd say wait till fall to do that pruning. So echinacea, I've just recently pruned it back and harvested a bunch of blossoms, and now it's starting to send out some new ones. And that plant is the winter savory there, going nuts and blossoming, which I'm letting it do because the bees love it. Here I've got my green sorrel that the chickens absolutely love for snacking on. And this oregano is one of my favorites, both for taste of the herb itself and when I get these purple blossoms. Oh my gosh, how beautiful is that? Also, oregano is a wonderful medicinal tea. Lots of great benefits to it. And the purple flowers tinge the tea a slight purple, and it's just delicious. One thing that is super overgrown is my lemon balm. Yeah, that really does need to be pruned back. And that one I might get away with because this only gets morning sun, and then it gets a lot of shade because the chicken coop is right next to it. Now there is some green growth down lower, and I think that would do fine when this is pruned back, given all the afternoon shade it's going to get. Now behind my melon bed here, I have some cherry tomatoes, which are still fruiting. This is a, what do you call it, Sweet 100. And it's going nuts. It's one of the few I didn't cage, along with the one next to it. These two were actually rescue plants. You know, the kind that the stores put for like 50 cents or whatever because they're so far gone. So I went ahead and gave it a try. And sure enough, after about 6 weeks in the ground, they have taken off, and we are picking from them daily. They're not as prolific as my cherry tomato plants normally are, but they've got tons of blossoms. I really do think they'll start producing well in the fall because that's what tomatoes generally do. The plants will do fine in hot temps, but tomatoes usually don't like to produce much when the temps are so high. Next to those, I've got some marigolds and some more tomatoes. These are caged, and they are fruiting, but they're not ripening. Those have been there for a bit. And there's more hidden throughout the plant. But again, the heat of the summer is keeping them from producing very much. The plant itself looks super, super healthy. It's thriving very nicely here. And I finally got a couple of tomato cages that are tall and sturdy and not falling apart and flimsy like most tomato cages are. So hopefully that will help. More marigolds. Here I've got some volunteer tomatillas that are starting to take off a bit. And in here, I really didn't think this would make it because look at that. That looks like a pretty pathetic, brittle, scrawny stem. But twined all around this cage and climbing it now is a loofah. Yeah, I really didn't think this plant was gonna make it, but it is taking off. And next to it, another tomato. These two tomatoes in the cages here are husky cherries. And the marigolds doing very well. And, you know, keeping pests away, that's what they say. I've never really had pests on my tomato plants. In fact, the only tomato worm I've ever seen in my garden here in, what is it now, 7 or 8 years, was on a pepper plant this spring. On a pepper plant! I didn't even know they would do that. So next to that bed with the marigolds and tomatoes, I've got this tomato plant. So it is a sun gold. Its tomatoes get this deep dark orange, and they are so delicious. I have heard a lot of people growing them this summer and for the first time, and they're amazed. They're so good. They're amazed at how sweet they are, how yummy. Yeah, it's been my favorite cherry tomato for a long time. And this plant has definitely been my most productive of the season so far. I do have two what were supposed to be sun golds in containers over here, and they're starting to be somewhat prolific. I think the reason that these two plants are starting to produce so many tomatoes is because they're in the shade of this 9-10 foot tall sunflower plant. It's been blooming for 6 weeks now, I'd say. And up there are the gorgeous dark heads of the flowers whose petals have already faded and dried and fallen off. I'm leaving those for the birds. I might cut a few off to save for my chickens, let the seeds dry out. There are more blossoms coming on. Up there, they're dark. Down here, some of them are very light colored. I love the variety of this one plant, and I do think the shade that is being cast on the tomato plants behind it is what's helping them. And down on the far end, I have another sunflower coming up. So I think by fall, it'll be as tall as the first one. In between, a bunch of empty space, because here I had zucchini planted over and over that the squirrels kept eating. And I never replanted after the last time. Now that I know the effect of the decoy owls, I think I'll put one on each end of this bed and let the zucchini try again at the end of August. But yes, that tall sunflower, which is one of my favorite flowers anyway, has been super enjoyable. I've really appreciated it because it doesn't mind the heat of summer at all. Next to it, I've got the bed I'm the most excited about and the most proud of. And yes, what is it? It's my red Roselle Hibiscus. So in my June tour, the red Roselle Hibiscus were just tiny little plants. And now the whole bed has filled up so enormously, and they're just going to keep getting bigger until the fall when they send out their gorgeous blossoms and their wonderful calyxes. This is the bed that in the middle I had the dark and light pink colored gladioli, which I showed in a few of my previous videos. They've finished blooming now, so their blossom stalks have been cut off, and the red Roselle Hibiscus have taken over the task of being beautiful, which they do very well, with their dark stems and their gorgeous leaves. Beautiful long before they send out their blossoms. And this side, the plants are up to my waist and very full. A couple of them were leaning and I've staked them up a bit, but they're just all doing very well. Now the other side, it's so interesting. I think it's because the other side got more intense sunlight in the afternoon, but they grew far slower. Now they're still healthy and thriving, as you can see. They're still full, they're looking great, but when you compare the two sides, the difference is very clear. And the thing is that this north side is about 4 or 5 feet farther away from the shade of the chicken coop, which happens in the afternoon. And the south side of this bed, of course, gets that a little tiny extra bit of shade, probably an extra hour and a half. And you can see the difference when you look at the bed from the end. Yes, they're all healthy, dark green and full, growing well, but the right side is about 2/3 the size at the most of the left side, maybe even only half the size. But I'm not worried, and they have plenty of time before fall, which is the time they'll be sending out their wonderful flowers. And if you're not familiar with red Roselle Hibiscus, the flower petals are gorgeous. They remind me of okra, which isn't surprising because it's also in the hibiscus family. But the calyxes, the dark maroon calyxes, same color really as these stems, that cradle the flowers are what, when dried, make red Roselle tea. And in the commercial arena, that's known as, say, berry tea, a zinger tea. If you look on the list of ingredients in all the herbal commercial teas that have anything to do with the berries, you'll see red Roselle Hibiscus or Roselle Hibiscus. And you can easily dry those and make your own wonderful tea. The other thing I discovered last fall is that those same calyx petals, as it were, they make the most amazing flavored jam. And so I'm planning to make a lot of that jam this year. In fact, that is why I grew so many red Roselle Hibiscus this year, because I want to have plenty of harvest in the fall so I can make lots of tea and lots of jam, both for myself for the whole next year and to give as gifts at Christmas. Not bothered by the heat one tiny bit is this lovely smoke bush. Yeah. New growth isn't bothered. blossoms coming out. And just look at those lovely leaves. Really enjoying this bush. And next to it, my new Eureka Meyer lemon, sending out new growth. And it does have lemons. There are about a dozen on the plant. And for a very young tree in a very hot summer, I'm very pleased. Some purple osteospermum or African daisies. Next to that, sun gold cherry and some Swiss chard there. Tell you what, the birds have been enjoying my Swiss chard this year. I've never had them eat it before, but they definitely have been. And here we have some butternut, which has come back since the squirrels have been warned away by the owls. My lime tree that desperately needs to be transplanted. It has 30 or 40 limes on it, but I'm waiting till fall to do the transplant. I think that's a little bit wiser. And some beautiful society garlic. That smells lovely. And one of my very young Satsuma mandarin orange trees. Look at that! It's kept 2 fruit. I'm amazed by that. It's such a little tree. And I probably should have taken them off, but it's handling it. And I'm looking forward to tasting them. I have a couple of crepe myrtles. This is the one that blooms pink. And this is the one that blooms purple. I don't know if you can see the true color here. It looks kind of pink on camera, I think, but in reality, it actually does look very, very purple. I have my snapdragons, which are still trying to look beautiful and carefree in this hot summer. But really, they're exhausted. They're sweaty. They're just tired and ready to give up. They have had enough of this heat. Kind of like me. This little blueberry plant, a very tiny start I put in here this spring, is doing fine. And the reason it is because it gets shade from about 2 p.m. onward. And next to my berry bed, I have some beautiful canna lilies that I just put in this year. And they are doing fabulous. They do like the shade that they get from the cement blocks, and then just from where they're positioned, their location in the garden from 2 p.m. on. So I think we'll be seeing some really pretty dark orange blossoms on those not too long from now, but you know, I think I enjoy the leaves even more. They're so gorgeous. Now this is a fig tree that I grew from a cutting off of my mature brown turkey fig. I actually grow quite a lot of fig trees from cuttings. It's super simple, that's why. This one's been in the pot for about 2.5 years now, and it has 5 or 6 figs on it this year, and that is something I was really hoping for but wasn't sure was going to happen, especially given the heat, but it has, so that's really a fun thing to see. Here are a bunch more of my fig cuttings that I started just this past spring, and they have leafed out, a lot of them anyway, and I will probably transplant them either this fall or in the following spring. Here at the very back of the garden where we get shade early in the afternoon, I have some potted flowers and the dahlias are looking so pretty. So are the volunteer Lilliput zinnias, although I think they need some deadheading. The honeysuckle keeps trying to bloom, smelling so lovely. And next to it, the corkscrew willow tree, which really suffered in the heat last summer, and this summer is so much hotter. I've been giving it a lot more water, and it is thriving and getting taller and taller, and it's just so lovely. We have a bit of a breeze this morning, and I am enjoying it. Some mint blossoms and some asparagus left go to seed. my rhubarb in a pot experiment. Now that I know where they grow on the property well, my good microclimate for them, I'll probably be transplanting it here in the fall to go with the others, because these have done so well here next to the new chicken run. They get shade in the morning and then filtered sun in the afternoon from the olive orchard over there. Now, if you saw my last video, I did a big rhubarb harvest. I froze a lot of rhubarb to make rhubarb pie later, and I made some rhubarb sauce that I enjoyed, super enjoyed, on some ice cream. It was so good. And I thought that would be my last rhubarb harvest of the season, because rhubarb tends to get tough in the summer, and you want to also let the leaves feed back into the root system the energy that it can store, the plant can store for the next year. However, in California, sometimes you can fudge that and get another harvest or two, and I think I may do one more, because some of these stalks are looking really good. I have two kinds of rhubarb, and I have the crimson ones that their stalk turns kind of red. They're over here, and these are much younger than my other plants, so I'm not going to take another harvest of these. I'm just going to let them grow, do whatever they want. I will plant something else around them though for the fall. I'll give it some thought, maybe something that likes a little more shade. And then these 4 rhubarb plants are the Victorias, which have green stalks and are noted for their hardiness. These 2 plants on the right are much younger, so again, I won't touch those. But this one maybe, and this one definitely going to harvest a little bit more. Right, chickens? Sounds like a good idea, doesn't it? Some beautiful purple tree kale. It's doing really well here where it gets shade until about 1, and then it is in the sun, but tree kale doesn't really mind the sun as long as it gets plenty of water and as long as it gets, part of the day in the shade. At least that's been my experience here, and this is so delicious. I love using it in stir fry. And in this deep metal container, which at one point had soil up to the top, you can see now it's settled down to maybe a 1/4 full. Need to definitely refill it at some point, but I think I'm going to wait till after I move. But in here we have growing a bunch of purple tree kale cuttings. Doing very well here. And down amidst the mire, walking green onions. So that's the tour for July. Now in the next week or so, I'm going to be putting up a couple of videos where I'll be sharing why I grow in containers so much and a recipe for another herbal tea blend at the same time. Plus, you might remember a video I did back in the spring on a seed challenge, both to myself and to anyone else who wanted to participate, on 3 plants that most people don't grow, at least not most people I know, but I wanted to give it a try. So let's just say as a preview that 2 of the 3 seeds doing really well. The other one, not so much. So stay tuned for those 2 videos. Meanwhile, thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. I know how exhausting the summer is for so many of us in this heat, and I encourage you, as I encourage myself, to keep on keeping on and to take some time in the shade, maybe in the evening or early in the morning, to enjoy your gardens, because, well, that's why we do all this, isn't it? So have a great week, and I'll see you next time, everyone.